Today on Locked On Canadiens, David Reinbacher has signed his entry-level deal. There's talk of Filip Zadina maybe being picked up by Montreal. And in free agency news, the Canadiens players apparently wanted Ryan O'Reilly to sign here. All that's coming up in today's Locked On Canadiens.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 881 of Locked On Canadiens. I think I set it up as 880, 851, either way. We have been doing this a very long time, and we thank you for making us your first listen of the day every single day, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. As you know, we're free and available, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Laura Sabb, also known as The Active Stick, and I am joined, as always, by the wonderful Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize, who, giving you a peek behind the curtain while he was waiting for me, did a bunch of the background work for this episode. Scott, how are you doing on this extremely hot and humid Wednesday evening?
Well, it's disgusting. Tending to a dog with some current needs and issues right now, which is always super fun. And yeah, it's just disgustingly hot. And out of everything here, we got a little Habs news today, and by that I mean we got Rocket news today. And we're still waiting on them to actually announce the signing that was announced by Cap Friendly yesterday. So, I don't really know what's going on there, but I got to say we are already hitting the slow part of the summer season, potentially earlier than we expected so far.
Yeah, it is. It has been getting a little bit slow, but Scott has confirmed that finally, we've been promising you a goalie expert for so long. Finally, it is coming in, I would say within a weekish, Scott.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, it's next weekish. We have confirmed that we will get a goalie expert. We will be confirming the exact date at a later episode. In the meantime, just keep an eye out, because we want to talk to some prospect experts, not just about the ones the Habs picked up, but also all the ones we're still excited about from last year and years before, and all their progress. So this summer is going to be a lot of prospect talk. We're going to continue to look to the future. And speaking of looking to the future, hear me out, Scott. Or not hear me out. Explain something to me. So the second that he is traded for by Toronto, Ryan O'Reilly is amazing. The second he signs elsewhere, he's overrated. Can you please explain to me what this means?
So here's my thought, is that I think we should push that into the next segment, because there's a lot more to expand on. Because if we want to talk about prospects and stuff first, David Reinbacher signed his entry-level contract today, and there's some stuff in there I think we should hit first and then expand on the Ryan O'Reilly thing, because I think there's a lot more meat to dive into there. And just because, pulling back the curtain here and the way everything works, is that the show starts with the ads and everything else in that, so it's a little bit harder to get everything in that first segment, and I will answer that question right off the top of the next segment. But for those who are looking at this on YouTube, I got to put these out of order, because I was thinking just of stuff as I worked today and put this together. But David Reinbacher signed his entry-level deal. The biggest thing is, and I cannot stress this enough, just because he has signed his entry-level deal does not mean he is going to play in North America immediately this season. I think he'll get a handful of potentially those rookie tournament games before he goes back to the Swiss League. And there's an interesting part, is that he has a European out clause in his contract for the first 2 years, I believe, is what Eric Engels reported. And on that is that if he is not maybe getting the ice time he wants, whether it be in the NHL or the AHL isn't really working, and he wants to go back to Europe, he can do so, and he will not be able to come back to North America until that his season has ended in Europe, if I have everything correctly there. So it's not like he's, I want to go back to Europe, but I might come back after the trade deadline, or if I'm feeling this or that. And I think that's probably a good thing. I am excited to see David Reinbacher in a Montreal Canadiens jersey. I am not rushing to get him into this lineup right away, even though I very easily think he could probably play NHL games this year and wouldn't be wholly out of place. But I think they have the right plan in place to get him into the lineup and protect him in the best way and protect his development going forward. Because as we know, the Canadiens still working through some of those kind of warts in their player development through the past years.
I think the thing is, I feel like they have some great personnel on there. It just feels like they don't seem to be moving in any kind of direction, right? And I think 100% of that, 100% of my perception of that is based on Slafkovsky and the way that they've handled him. They seem overly patient with him, but they seem to have great skills coaches and motivators. I think that's a lot, like mentors in the organization. And if you have been following any of the social media or anything like that, you'll know that Paul Byron has been, hanging out with the team, the prospects over the course of development camp, and people are calling for him to join the front office as a player development person in some capacity or other. I think that would be fantastic if they can swing it. Paul Byron, much loved in Montreal, definitely somebody his teammates adore, definitely somebody who can mentor and provide a lot of leadership to the young players. He's just, his body's just too broken up to play, but that doesn't mean that he can't still be an asset to the Montreal Canadiens organization. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is that I like the choices that they're making in terms of personnel, but it doesn't seem to have a cohesive, unified plan yet from the outside. And we always get accused of being like, "Oh, you're not the front office, just trust in them." It's not that. It's just that from the outside, it just doesn't feel like it. And so we don't know what's going on behind the scenes for the most part. But I do think that that David Reinbacher is in a good position having signed this deal. I still think he should be protected at least for the first season. But a lot of the scouts and the prospect experts said that he's one of the most NHL ready players in this draft. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's 100% NHL ready or that the Canadiens should dump him in the NHL right away. I just think that they're giving themselves the option, and they're giving him the option, and they're going to go with how he progresses. I'm excited for him. Particularly, I don't think it was necessarily an easy entry into the Montreal market, given how the reaction went to him. But I think this gives the Canadiens a little bit more control over him, I think.
And I think the biggest part out of this too is that it kind of gives them a guiding timeline here, is that if we think that, the best plan is, hey, if, like, let's say they get into next season and he is likely probably an NHL ready player full time by that point, or at very least will be playing huge minutes for the Rocket in the AHL, and maybe something isn't working, maybe there's an adjustment still to be made. They don't have to push back or force through that, I'm not going to say they've done it in the past, but some players that it just did not fit in that timeline here, it gives them another 2 years to make sure that they are ready for. So when he is coming in here, you're going to have Owen Beck, who will be coming in because he can't play full-time AHL next year. But a lot of these younger prospects who are going to be graduating into that NHL role or fighting for that full-time NHL spot there are all going to be coming together at once. There will be a point of divergence basically between what was left from the previous regime and what has come in from the drafts from the end of the Marc Bergevin era and the start of the Kent Hughes era into this team here. And Reinbacher's ELC kind of fits right into that. And there isn't a rush to just get him into the lineup. Spots are very full as it is right now, trying to plan through this all the way down into the AHL. There's a lot of bodies, and they still need time to see what is Jaden Strubl's professional game look like full-time. Is William Trudeau going to take a next step? What is Logan Mayu's professional game look like right now? Is Arbor Jacki going to take a next step? Is Justin Barron going to continue to improve? And they got to see what these guys are at. And that doesn't even count Lane Hudson and Adam Engstrom, who are also in this same timeline here. It's the right amount of time and space. And there's a lot of performance bonuses and everything in there because, of course, top 5 pick, there's going to be that. It's good that this is done and out of the way. The video of him FaceTiming with his parents as he signed his contract was fantastic. He seems like a really bright kid. I am hoping he is here for rookie camp and some of those preseason games. I hope he is also basically protected by anybody with fists and anger in the Canadiens lineup when he does play. I'm really excited about this, and I know that people have their lingering sentiments about the draft and whatnot, but I'm finding it hard to not be excited for David Reinbacher, the player, right now.
And I do want to stress, people are allowed to have their opinions. They just can't take it out on the pick, on the player himself. It's not his fault. That's. So I know we're going to have a good summer. We're going to talk about him. And you brought up Adam Engstrom. He's somebody the listeners want to hear more about. So Patrick, if you're listening, please come on. We want to talk about Engstrom, but we have, like I said, prospect guests coming up. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about that Ryan O'Reilly thing that Scott would not let me talk about until the second segment. And that's coming up in just one moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. To take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets. That's up to $200. That's right. All you got to do is bet $20 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. And that's $200 that you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run. All of this is on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB or anything really than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball and us. All right, Scott, am I now allowed to ask a question?
Yes.
What is the difference between Ryan O'Reilly signing with Toronto, and then as soon as he does, traded for by Toronto, and as soon as he does that, he's an amazing player. And then when he signs with another team in free agency, all of a sudden he's overrated and not that good. Can you explain this to me?
Well, the thing is, and this is not just Toronto fans, this is Habs fans, this is every fan of every team. When a player that you liked leaves, they are never then as good as they were when they were with you. And I thought Ryan O'Reilly he was a fine ad for the Leafs. It made sense for them. And they wanted to circle back around and bring him around here, but I'm looking at their cap situation and what Brad Treliving has done now, and I look at this and go, I don't think this would have fit, to be quite honest with you. And he went off to Nashville, which, okay, they bought out Matt Duchene, so he's likely his replacement. They traded Ryan Johansson. They're doing a retool, rebuild, something or other here. And the biggest part of all of this is that the Montreal Canadiens were I don't want to say second in the running, but were very clearly in the running to add Ryan O'Reilly in this offseason. I assume Toronto was up there, and I assume obviously Nashville and maybe someone else was in there, but the Canadiens players, and we don't know who, there were apparently a few of them, kind of wanted Kent Hughes to go after Ryan O'Reilly and add him to this team in free agency. And Hughes, the only thing that really prevented him from doing so was their current cap constraints, which he is still working on solving through and maybe not having to LTIR Carey Price to make any kind of call-up move or anything this season. It's a pretty wild revelation to come out of the start of free agency, because I wouldn't have thought there'd be any kind of interest in that, just because I assume O'Reilly wants to get another Stanley Cup under his belt, another postseason run under his belt there.
For those of you who are not watching on YouTube, as usual, I forgot to unmute myself. There's a whole lot going on at my house right now. I no longer live alone, so I will be using the mute button more often, and I keep forgetting to unmute myself before I start agreeing with Scott. To me, the real question is, he does have kind of a shelf life because he is looking for another cup run. But I thought it was really interesting that the players were really into this idea. That to me is what stood out. I don't necessarily know of a lot of situations where this actually happens. I sometimes hear rumors, and again, it's never ever confirmed, of like players being like, well, if this guy's here next year, I don't want to sign here, or I'm not staying, or please trade me away from him. And it does tend to happen more with coaches than other players. But like you hear about like quote unquote bad in the room guys, or good in the room guys, but like a extremely wanted in the room guys like that, you don't hear a whole lot about.
Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering which players were the ones that went to bat for Ryan O'Reilly here. Joel Edmondson, I assume when he was here, which makes this whole thing a little bit grim and macabre, I guess, is that Edmondson played with him when they won a Stanley Cup together in St. Louis. And before that, I wonder if someone like Sean Monahan, who's played against him for a long time, or even if it's someone like a Nick Suzuki or players from other teams that Ryan O'Reilly might have been a part of, that they look at this and go, hey, maybe this is a fit here. You have Monahan play the wing somewhere. You have Ryan O'Reilly. But my biggest thing with this is putting the cap aside is to have signed him in, let's say he's the Canadiens' third line center, which super cool. Love that. That's great. Suzuki, Doc, Newhook, Dvorak, Monahan, Jake Evans. There's a lot of centers on this team. And that means that if Ryan O'Reilly were coming here, you were saying at the very least, Alex Newhook is likely moving to the wing and that Christian Dvorak is out the door, because that's the only way you can really make this work here. And I do think they want to see Alex Newhook at center because that's why they traded for him. I think they want him to fill that center role there, perhaps a little bit more efficiently than Christian Dvorak has in some ways. It's a great idea in thought. In practicality, there's a lot more shifting around that has to happen here because he signed, I think, $4.5 million for 3 years. You got to shed Hoffman too, or Armia, or Dvorak, or someone like Brendan Gallagher or Josh Anderson. And I don't think they're going to do that for either player there, which actually there's a name that I didn't think of. Brendan Gallagher might have been the one who went to bat for him too. I believe they've played on a world championship team together. I could be wrong, but in practicality, it doesn't make a lot of sense. From the standpoint of we want to build like a stacked team down the middle, it makes all the sense in the world, and I'm not against it. It's just there's a lot of other moves than the Kent Hughes has to get to make it work.
All right, so I'm going to give you 4 players, and then you're going to tell me if come opening night, so past training camp, etc., if they will be on the Montreal Canadiens roster. Player number 1, Josh Anderson.
Yes, 100%.
Player number 2, Brendan Gallagher.
Yes.
Player number 3, Yoel Armia.
I'm going to say yes, just due to contract term. No one's buying that contract up right now.
Player number 4, obviously, Christian Dvorak.
I want to say no. And the thing with that is Monahan can fill in that third line center role pretty well, or it can go to Alex Newhook if he can't cut it in their top 6 as a winger, because I'm still not sure what the plan with Alex Newhook is 100% yet. And I think that's okay. We haven't seen him play for the Canadiens yet. I do think that he is the odd man out here, kind of looking in at this and that. I don't think it's his fault. I think Marc Bergevin basically brought him in and they kind of Jonathan Drouin him a little bit, where it's, hey, we need you to do all these things and not really give you the support for that. So I do think that there will be a buyer for him at some point once free agency kind of calms down a little bit. He, out of the 4 of those, if I'm ranking it, Anderson, Gallagher are locks, I think, for opening night based on contract term and cost alone. Armia's like a 95% based on his term and contract. And Christian Dvorak, I put it 50-50. I wouldn't be shocked if he is. I wouldn't be shocked if he isn't.
Bonus, Mike Hoffman.
I'm going to say like maybe 60-40. I think the Canadiens are going to have to accept they're not going to get much for him. If you get a 7th round pick, you trade off and you remove that cap there. But I wouldn't be shocked if he's also there and becomes him and Monahan become their trade deadline like showcase pieces.
All right, so we are now going to talk about Zadina. This is going to be an interesting conversation, I think, because I don't know if 3 years ago this would have even been a conversation that would have been on the table. Should the Canadiens pick up Filip Zadina? That's all coming up in just one moment on Locked On Canadiens. All right, before we get into this segment, I just really quickly want our listeners to weigh in on what I should put as my background. It should be something that I can remove from a wall. So, whatever it is, let me know. I am now, I think, installed for the time being in my new area, new place, new desk. And I know a lot of listeners have pointed out, or people who watch on YouTube have pointed out that my background has been boring. So, let me know what you want me to put there. In the meantime, let's talk about Filip Zadina. If I think, the Canadiens got a lot of heat, took a lot of heat for not selecting him. And it was, obviously
The
every
Kotkaniemi
front office.
draft.
Yeah.
It was.
No, I mean, sorry, every front. I didn't say every front office. I didn't mean every front office. I mean, every year the front office does something and we all ask questions about it. And at the time with Kotkaniemi, it really seemed like the Canadiens should have picked Zadina. He was, I think, much higher on a lot of public scouting lists and a lot higher on, importantly, Canadiens fans' wish lists. And we were disappointed. And then obviously there was a whole thing with like, oh, the Canadiens are interested in him. They didn't pick him. And then he like wanted to show them what they were missing out by not selecting him, and how the tables have turned. It's I would call this a no-win situation because again, they lost Kotkaniemi to another team. I think that if they'd held on to him and developed him differently, it would have gone differently, but it's too late to look back on that. So the Canadiens really end up with nobody. So at the same time, the Detroit Red Wings seem to have fallen out of love with Zadina and now no longer are interested in investing in him.
Yeah, the thing with this is that they put him on waivers. He cleared waivers, and apparently this is going to result in. I'm wondering now that he's cleared, and which I believe he can be assigned to an AHL team right away at some point, is this going to be a last chance? Some team come pick him up, stash him on your AHL team to start the year. And I'm just kind of going through and I'm looking at the 2018 draft here, and I've sorted this by points, and he's up there. He's behind Barrett Hayton, Adam Boquist, Keandre Miller, Evan Bouchard, Igor Sharangovich, Noah Dobson, Joel Farabee. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is one of the top scoring players from that draft class, but at the top is Brady Tkachuk, Andrei Svechnikov, Quinn Hughes, Rasmus Dahlin. There's a gap here. And for my thought with this is that with the Canadiens, if you can stash him, that's great. You can bury most of that cap hit. But again, my biggest thing is, what do you do with the space here? Something hasn't gone right in Detroit. And I don't know if it's a development thing or what. And I know that, like you said, Habs fans are probably, hey, this didn't work out. Kotkaniemi turned into a pretty standard good NHL player. He's no longer a Canadian, though. So even the gamble on him didn't really pay off long term. And we could go into all kinds of history on the whole Kotkaniemi thing. But I'm wondering if Kent Hughes looking to see, like they signed Elias Anderson, a former top 10 pick. Filip Zadina fits that role that he hasn't found that niche that works for him. And he's scored well at the AHL level, decently well there, and just hasn't put it together at the NHL level. And I don't know, is it having Jeff Blashill as his coach originally? Was it just things aren't working out? Is it just if there's not that next gear there? Maybe he's a great AHL player and a so-so NHL player. It's hard to know because I look at Detroit and they've struggled a fair bit in recent years too. So it's hard to know what the cause is here. There's a lot of Red Wings fans who aren't really shedding a tear, which is never probably a good sign for this. Excuse me. I just don't know if I like the idea of it, but then I take a realistic look at this Canadiens lineup and their AHL lineup and I go, there's a lot of wingers. There's a lot of prospects. Guys like Sean Farrell are probably going to be starting in the AHL just until they clear out the Armia, the Hoffmans, etc., because there's not as much room as there was before. And bodies will move around. But if you add Filip Zadina, you're probably going to add him and try to get him as an NHL player here. What winger spot are you going to put him in? You've got Caulfield, you've got Anderson, you've got Slafkovsky, you've got potentially Newhook, you've got Raphael Harvey-Pinard, you've got Jesse Alonen, you've got Sean Farrell, you've got Joshua Waugh coming up here. You have a lot of bodies, and you're not going to stick him in a fourth line role to eat defensive minutes because it's not going to get the best out of him. Logically, it doesn't make sense, but like this goes back to the Ryan O'Reilly debate. Hey, if we just plug in all these players who are good in theory, the team will be good. It's just finding the space for said players, and I don't think the Canadiens can make that work right now.
Do you know who he makes sense for, but who isn't going to pick him up? The Ottawa Senators. Toronto.
I mean, I don't think anybody's picking him up at this point. Like, he cleared waivers. Like, nobody wants him at this point, which is usually a pretty telling sign that if someone wanted a cheap young winger on waivers, they would take him. And they didn't. Simple as that, which tells me either people talk to Steve Yzerman, there's something behind the scenes that just doesn't sound great. And for the Canadiens, I guess you stay your course. Maybe if Detroit says future, for whatever, because they tried to trade him already and got no bites for anything. So I don't know. That value can't be high in a trade. But if you're the Canadiens, is this the risk you want to take on to rehabilitate someone else's player that it's not working? Yeah, it worked with Kirby Dach. We're waiting on Alex Newhook, maybe Elias Anderson, but it's a lot to ask to continue to do this over and over and over again.
Right. And I think the reason that he has been tied to Montreal isn't just the idea that Montreal wanted him back in, what was it, the 2018, 17, whatever it was, that draft. It's also due to the fact that the Canadiens have sort of made a habit of taking on players and rehabilitating them, like first rounders, and rehabilitating them in this market. I think it's actually quite interesting too, just watching like his progression or lack thereof, and how much of a gamble drafting is even in the first round. Like, even if you pick somebody in that top 30 or now top 32, it's never a guarantee that they're going to make the team or that they're going to be a successful, sustainable, like NHL player with longevity. Either way, I think it was an interesting question to bring up. And I think it was an interesting thing to talk about. But we have all kinds of other stuff to talk about, including your mailbag questions. Do not forget that tomorrow is the Friday mailbag. We've got a backlog of questions, but we still want more. We always want more. So please send us your mailbag questions to lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. You can also leave them in the YouTube comments, but put mailbag question at the beginning. We had an interesting one the other day pertaining to Alex Newhook. So we will talk a little bit more about that. And you can also tweet them to us at LO_Canadiens. You can DM them to us on Twitter for as long as that site exists. We are looking into what other social media platforms we should be going on to now that Twitter seems like it might have neared its end. In the meantime, you can still find us there. I'm at the Active Stick. Scott is at Scott Matla. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.